Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, and I wish to introduce to you the factions of the Warhammer 40K universe. So, let us explore the faction known as the Warhounds, who are now infamously known across the galaxy as the World Eaters. Gentle listener, fear not if you hear terms that you do not yet know. I shall explain them all in my report on Horus Lupercal, which should be available very soon. I hope to see you then. Across the galaxy there is a name that strikes horror and terror into all that hear it. No surrender is possible, no clemency can be hoped for, no barter or braying can prevent. A report of the World Eaters can mean only one thing to any who receive this doleful news: annihilation. Where other forces of chaos will expect and accept surrender, sacrifice and supplication, the World Eaters do not, for they are the hand of doom for any in their path. Their savagery is legendary, and their arrival means only slaughter. They bend the knee to none, and expect it not of their victims. When a World Eater fleet arrives, it heralds the scouring of countless worlds, of all life in a tsunami of blood, the only sacrifice that the great god Khorne deems worthy. The World Eaters once served the Imperium, but they were always butchers, as they had been made by their father, the Emperor. Despite how much the faithful may attempt to hide this fact, they are as the Emperor intended. Other Legiones Astartes, who have fallen to chaos, can claim that they were once shining knights in the service of the Emperor, but in fact, little has changed for the World Eaters except their master. They have always been true to their core. They merely now gain accolades and blessings from their new god, where previously they received only acrimony, contempt and censure from the arch-hypocrite, the Emperor, for performing the duties that they were made to perform. I will now lean on existing wisdom before I get to the heart of the matter. Trust me, you will not want to miss it. To quote, "The 12th Legion was formed on Terra from no particular geographical recruitment ground. Fragmentary records do suggest, however, that during the formation process of the Legion, an experimental screening process may have resulted in the initial intakes being formed from the most aggressive and competitive of candidates. While this cannot be confirmed with certainty, early records of the Legion do note that it was considered a highly aggressive, hot-blooded and savage force. The nascent, relatively small Legion was deployed in the Unification Wars, the first recorded engagement being the Saafrik Liberation. However, for reasons unknown, after their initial battles, they were largely held in the Imperial Reserve right through the rest of the Terran Unification, and even through the conquest of the Sol system. While the true reasons for this withdrawal from the front lines are unknown, one suggested reason was that they were simply kept off the board in case a sudden mishap in the Imperial campaigns resulted in a need for swift, fresh reinforcement. Another, more whispered proposed reason is that they were deliberately held in check in case any disloyalty among the Emperor's troops emerged and needed to be quickly ended. Nonetheless, the Legion continued to grow and determinedly train for war. This dedication, as well as their savage and tenacious demeanor during the few times that they were deployed in combat during this period, reportedly led to the Emperor himself dubbing the 12th Legion as his Warhounds. In prideful recognition of this honor, the 12th adopted a red hound as their insignia. The Warhounds were finally unleashed as a Legion force partly by circumstance. The Imperial colony of Cerberus rose up in rebellion, and it quickly became apparent that Space Marine forces were needed to quell the insurrection. The Great Crusade having begun, most of the Space Marine legions had already been assigned to expeditionary fleets and sent out into the wider galaxy. The Emperor was therefore minded to activate the Warhounds, sending them to Cerberus personally, with instructions to carry his wrath to those that defied him. Cerberus was invaded at 0300 hours Terran. The all-clear signal was transmitted by the Warhounds commander at 0808 AM. When asked how many prisoners were waiting to be processed, the Warhounds commander replied that he had not been ordered to take any. Attached Imperial Army troops sent into the Cerberus in their aftermath reported discovering scenes of shocking butchery, an indication of massive casualties on both sides. As the Great Crusade progressed, the 12th Legion was split into a number of independent commands, each many thousands of Space Marines strong. These detachments were notionally used as reserve elements for other Crusade forces, but in fact recorded as being used as frontline assault troops in many successful campaigns, fighting alongside brother legions such as the First Legion, the Iron Warriors, and the Space Wolves. Additionally, Warhound reserves would be sent in to provide a killing edge to various Imperial Army formations in troublesome war zones. These deployments created the reputation of the Warhounds. They became known Crusade-wide as vicious shock troops, whose actions were not without cost. It was said that a Warhound's deployment had only two outcomes: glorious, vicious slaughter, or just slaughter. Additionally, rumours began to circulate that the Warhounds were intemperate with all those who stood in their path, friend and foe alike. Stories of the Legion culling human regiments whose performance they found wanting began to spread. The truth of these rumours could not easily be determined. The Warhounds deliberately kept a distance from other Legiones Astartes elements where possible. The only definite fact noted about the Legion during this time was that they possessed an unusually harsh code of internal discipline, necessitated apparently by their own fractious nature. The principal concentration of Warhounds Astartes, around 8,000 legionnaires, had been grouped into the 13th Expeditionary Fleet, alongside dedicated support and naval elements. As the Crusade wore on and the various legions grew in size to the point where they no longer needed a standing reserve reinforcement force, the scattered units of Warhounds were consolidated into the 13th Fleet, upon the Legion muster world of Bod. Added to the 13th were many other Imperial forces, especially those who had similarly dark or questionable reputations for violence, particularly Feral World and Abhuman troops. Notable additions to the 13th were the Titans of Legio Audax and the warriors of the Numan gun clans, both powerful elements whose conduct had fallen into a pall of suspicion and distrust. It is believed that this particular grouping was a deliberate choice by the War Council to corral into one force all the Imperial elements which had shown a tendency to cause massive destruction and loss of enemy life during their campaigns, so that the Imperium had a formation at hand that could be deployed where the total annihilation of the enemy and their works was desired. The record of all of these various forces led to the 13th Expeditionary Force being known as the Bloody 13th in various Imperial circles. After Angron assumed command of this newly rechristened legion, they once again mustered upon the world of Bod, where Angron took stock of his forces. Always possessed of the harshest self-disciplined training regimes in the Space Marine legions, the World Eaters went to new lengths under Angron's direction, adopting fighting pits and gladiatorial combat into their doctrines. Each warrior who passed the new tests wore scars aplenty to show it. Those who failed did not live to try again. Whatever Terran martial traditions that existed in the Warhounds were erased by Angron's new gladiatorial ones, and by the time the Primarch led his World Eaters from Bod under their new fanged Moor symbol, the World Eaters had embraced Angron's own red code of savage competition and the butchery of the weak. However, Angron still refused to acknowledge his sons, and during their campaigns, he ordered them to defeat the targeted world within 31 hours. This was the span of a single Nucerian day, and the amount of time it had taken Angron and his army of slave rabble to score their greatest victory. Despite the brutality and even hatred Angron showed his legion, the World Eaters were committed to earn his respect. Meanwhile, Angron had ordered his apothecarian, Garland Surlak, to replicate his butcher's nails and implant the resultant creations into the brains of his legionaries. However, the process proved fatal to any Marine who dared try to endure the process. Angron proved disgusted with his weak sons and managed to flee to a feral world for 2 whole years before Khan found him and convinced him to rejoin the Legion. Time and time again, the World Eaters failed to meet this deadline, and each time Angron demanded the punishment be decimation, forcing 1 of every 10 World Eaters to be killed by the other 9. After Centurion Mago refused to comply with decimation after Gehenna massacre, Angron was thrown into a bloody frenzy and massacred several World Eaters before being subdued by his own librarians. The episode created a crisis within the Legion that saw Mago lead a revolt when apothecarian Garland Surlak announced that he had finally perfected a method for mass production of the butcher's nails within the Legion. However, the revolt failed. Mago was slain, and Khan became the first World Eater to successfully endure the nails. The result of an entire Space Marine Legion enhanced with the aggression engines was seen during what became known as the Gehenna Massacre, an entire planetary population massacred in one night of unparalleled violence. Soon, the World Eaters would become a byword for mass-scale slaughter and violence. Their enemies not merely shot down or blasted into oblivion, but killed to a man in their streets and fortresses. Their legend for brutality became so strong that more than once, non-compliant worlds would surrender at the threat of the World Eaters being unleashed upon them. Already a breed apart, Angron's legionaries began to be actively shunned by their fellow Space Marine legions, and spoke of in dread by those Imperial citizens who knew of their actions. The planets upon which the World Eaters fell were not merely crushed, they were destroyed utterly. This caused concern even among hardened Imperial commanders, not least of whom was Primarch Reboot Gilliman of the Ultramarines, who decried the atrocities of Angron during the cleansing of Arigata. Eventually, Leman Russ brought his Space Wolves to confront Angron, bringing word that the Emperor wanted the World Eaters to cease implanting themselves with aggression engines, and to further urge Angron to cease his massacres. What resulted was a brief but bloody confrontation between the World Eaters and Space Wolves, with Angron besting Russ in single combat, but allowing himself to become encircled and doomed to be killed by Space Wolves in the process, if they so wished. When it became clear that Angron was a lost cause and did not understand that his failure to lead resulted in him being entrapped, Russ ordered a withdrawal. After this event, the Emperor moved to intervene, reprimanding Angron and ordering the prohibition of the butcher's nails and similar psychosurgery. He further ordered the World Eaters out of the main line of the Great Crusade, sending them to the northern fringes of known space to combat Xenos instead of human foes. This exile, likely intended as a punishment, instead allowed the World Eaters the freedom to operate without higher Imperial observation. They did not cease from the practices the Emperor had forbidden. After some period of this exile, the Emperor recalled the World Eaters to the line. Still concerned with their conduct, he turned to his favourite and most trusted son, the War Master Horus Lupercal, and assigned him the role of mentoring Angron and overseeing the World Eaters in an attempt to restrain them and to return them to more acceptable Imperial modes of conduct. This would prove to be a grievous mistake. As the hour of the heresy grew near, Horus had little problem with corrupting the bitter and unhappy Angron. Horus was able to feed the flames of Angron's discontent with the Emperor's prior behavior, reinforcing Angron's perception that he had been betrayed, and that the Emperor was a moral weakling. When the sons of Horus broke with the Emperor's Imperium, Angron and the World Eaters were with him. "Tell me, Father, why stand with the arch-traitor? I do not stand with Horus. I stand against the Emperor. Do you understand, Kuraga? I am free now. Free!" World Eater Centurion Kuraga and the Primarch Angron, after the former's mortal wounding by the latter, at the Istvan III massacre. They fought with savagery in Ultramar before being recalled by the War Master to the siege of the Emperor on his throne world, once called Earth, now known as Terra. World Eaters were instrumental in the siege of Terra itself. Legion records claim that it was the World Eaters who made the first breach in the walls of the Imperial Palace, a claim perhaps verified by surviving Imperial vidlogs of the siege, which show the World Eaters breaching the walls with Angron at their head. However, it is also said that it was one of their champions, Khan, who was the first to enter said breach. End quote. Mewling whelps of the Imperium claimed that ours was a broken Primarch, that he was the runt of the herd, despite us all knowing that that was the worm Lorgar. Why do they say this? Because of all of the Primarchs, only Angron, our sire, did not control his world of landing. Only he was defeated in war. But he gained so much more, and we gained from his experience. We gained truth. We gained clarity. We were anointed before ever the other legions found out that which we already knew. The Emperor was a tyrant and unworthy of our loyalty or veneration. He could not protect the Primarchs from being taken from his very hearth, his deepest dungeons, where his strength was greatest and his watch most vigilant. The Emperor was weak. When the master of mankind found our sire, he revealed himself as the uncaring demagogue that he is. Angron was fighting amongst his people, prepared to die by their side, shoulder to shoulder, blade to blade, against an insurmountable foe. Angron had honor. But the corpse god did not help his own son's beleaguered people. The Emperor did not unleash fire and wrath on the enemies of his own son. He had but to raise a finger, nod his head, whisper a word, to give one damned order. But no, the uncaring coward used his scientific sorcery to kidnap our Lord from the very midst of his people, his brothers and sisters, the kin of his choosing, on the night before their last battle. He stole Angron from his destiny. And so they went to that battle alone, leaderless and bereft. But still they fought, and still they died. The Emperor did not lift a finger. He thought that he did nothing, but it was not so. He anointed our Lord in blood, the blood of his own kin, his kin of choosing. On that day the Emperor gave sacrifice to the greater god. He gave homage to the true god, Khorne. All of our sire's life, he was bathed in blood. He grew in an arena, covered in blood. He slew in the arena, letting the blood flow as it should. They call it mutilation, we call it enhancements. The butcher's nails implanted in his skull, pushing into his mind, cutting out all pity, mercy, and love. The other legions decried Angron's order to implant the nails into his loyal legion. They knew nothing. For the nails do not take, they give. They give clarity. They give purpose. They give joy. Before the advent of our Lord, we were but soldiers, saluting, marching, waving flags, and bending the knee to an unworthy hypocrite. Now we are more. Now we are titans bestriding the battlefield. Our every volley a chorus of joyous worship. Our every thrust of the blade a prayer. Our every swing of the axe a sacrament. We are the sons of the greatest god. We are the servants of the first god. We are the champions of Khorne. For he is a simple god. He is an honorable god, and he wishes only one thing. No treacherous trickery, no licentious debauchery, no cowardly contamination. Khorne craves only one thing, battle and blood. For Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, as long as it flows. So we cry blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, and from us, his greatest warriors, his greatest champions, it flows like a river. Gentle listener, I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed my brief introduction to the World Eaters, then please consider liking and subscribing. I will be covering other worshippers of the ruinous powers, and I would not want you to miss out.